want to offer a couple of self-compassion practices for some of you for the purposes of supporting yourself as we're going through these practices. And one of these is opening and closing our hearts. Sometimes for the purposes of our jobs, we need to close our hearts because the amount of trauma that we're dealing with from our clients is so overwhelming. And so please know that today, if at any point you need to either open your heart or close your heart, that is perfectly fine. And we will also be practicing self-compassion techniques. And self-compassion is almost like practicing placing a balm on top of our heart. And sometimes we place gentle words and wishes on top of our heart so that when our heart feels safe enough, when it feels warmed enough to thaw out and open, those loving words will fall in. Another practice we're going to be going over today is seeing other people and seeing ourselves through a loving gaze, perhaps through imagining someone like a pet or a child with whom you have an uncomplicated relationship, and then maybe even recalling a sweet interaction moment with them, looking at them, maybe in your mind's eye with a loving gaze, and then practicing offering that same loving gaze to yourself. And my absolute favorite exercise that I encourage you to practice at any time, either today or in your sessions, is compassionate breathing in and out. This exercise was created by Kristin Neff and Chris Germer. They're the pioneers of self-compassion research. And it goes like this. We can place our hand on our heart center, whatever feels comfortable. And we can breathe in, breathing in gentle, loving energy for you. And then breathe out for someone else, whether it's for our client or a person whose story we're hearing. Now, the truth is, everyone feels lonely. Loneliness is a universal emotion, much like anxiety, sadness, fear, and surprise. And perhaps the most profound experience of loneliness I've ever felt was when I was 12 years old, when my family and I first moved to the United States. So I was born and raised in Ukraine. And when I was 12 years old, we immigrated to the United States as refugees. And I don't know how many of you remember being 12, being in middle school, being in 7th grade, or how many of you successfully repressed that time of your life? You know, I usually joke that as adults, we need to start some kind of I survived middle school support group. Yeah, and I see some of you are saying, yeah, being 12 is hard. It's the worst. I agree. And so being that 12-year-old, that middle schooler from another country who didn't speak English, I made a very easy bullying target, and I was very, very lonely. And so I realized that the best way for me to learn about American culture was to learn the language as soon as possible. So what I would do is I would watch television shows, usually sitcoms like Full House and Family Matters, with closed captions. And I had this giant dictionary on my lap, and I would translate as quickly as I could what the closed caption said in trying to learn the language. So I usually joke that Steve Urkel taught me English. But the truth is these shows also taught me a lot about affection and hugs. What I saw in these shows is that when kids needed a hug, they could just go up to their parent or their family member or friend or any guardian or loved one, and they could ask for a hug or they could give a hug. And as I was watching this show, as I was watching Family Matters, I realized that I was very touch-starved. Now, I didn't know this term at the time, but I just knew that I really needed a hug. In fact, I needed a hug so badly that I felt like I was about to start crying. And so I decided that I was going to go up to my mother And I was going to give her a hug because I really needed one. And I figured maybe she would need one too. Well, I went into the kitchen where my mother was slicing cucumbers, and I just gave her a big hug. Well, that did not go over very well because she threw my arms off of her and she yelled at me, "What are you doing? I was cutting and I could have cut you. What do you think you're doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. And I wanted a hug." And my mother stood there for a second and looked at me and she said, "This isn't Full House. We're not an American family. We don't hug." And I was so hurt and so upset. I stormed into my bedroom in that, preteen kind of dramatic way. And I slammed the door. And then I took my dictionary and I slammed it on the ground and I kicked it under the bed. And then I realized, well, I'm going to need my dictionary to do my homework. So I dove on the ground and I was trying to fish the dictionary from under the bed. And it is at that point that my mother walked in. So she must have heard the thud from when I dropped the dictionary. And she ran into the room and she said, "Oh my gosh, are you hurt?" And I'm not proud of this, but I lied. I pointed to my arm, the arm that was still under the bed, trying to fish out my dictionary. And I made it look like I hurt my arm by falling on the floor. Well, my mother knelt next to me and she hugged me and comforted me. And then she took me to the emergency room to make sure that my arm is okay. So one arm got x-rayed and the other arm got poked and prodded with needles for multiple tests. And I didn't cry, I didn't squeak, I didn't make a sound because I told myself that I deserved it for lying. We spent 6 hours in the emergency room that day, all for one hug. And if you were to ask the 12-year-old me, she would have told you it was worth it. And the truth is, all mammals or most mammals need some form of affection. It doesn't necessarily mean physical affection. Not everyone likes physical affection, but some form of support. Now, I imagine many of you are familiar with the famous Harlow study. And in case you're not, I actually want to tell you how this study began. So Harry Harlow was an American psychologist in 1950s. He was studying baby monkeys. So these poor baby monkeys were taken away from their mothers and single caged. So they were caged by themselves. Now, in their cage, on the bottom of the cage, there would be this cloth diaper that they used basically as a litter box. But it was the only soft thing in their cage. So these poor baby monkeys would cuddle with this filthy, dirty cloth diaper. And when the researchers would go to change the cloth diaper to place another one there, the baby monkeys would get so distressed because it was as if they were taking away their mother or their teddy bear. So these baby monkeys would bite and scratch and fight back to hold on to their cloth diaper. And this is when Harry Harlow realized, wait a minute, maybe there's something to this. Maybe these baby monkeys need some kind of physical affection in addition to being fed. And so this is when he designed his famous experiment that I imagine most of you are familiar with, where he created two fake monkeys, one wire mesh monkey that had a feeding bottle, and one soft cloth monkey, basically a teddy bear monkey. And he predicted that the baby monkeys would spend roughly an equal amount of time with both fake mothers. What he did not anticipate, however, is that the baby monkeys spent 85% of their waking hours cuddling the cloth mother, suggesting that affection, physical affection, safety, security is very important for mammals. And we see this in humans, we see this in monkeys, we also see this in cats and dogs and mice and rats and hamsters and most mammals around the world. In fact, when animals are individually housed for too long, against their will, and without any sense of affection from other mammals, including humans, they're likely to start self-harming by scratching out pieces of their fur. Human inmates, when they are sent to solitary confinement in the United States, as far as I understand, solitary confinement can sometimes last for the longest amount of time in the world. In the United States, sometimes solitary confinement can last 8 to 12 months with minimal human interaction and with minimal access to things like sanitary napkins, medicine, including psychiatric or transition medication, or exercise. And inmates who are in solitary confinement for an extended period of time are more likely to self-harm or attempt suicide, as recent research studies are telling us.